Welcome to the panel and welcome to the panelists. It's great to have this group here. I want to say one more word, if I can, about Shirley Povich. Racial justice mattered to Shirley Povich. He hounded the Washington Redskins for decades for failing to sign black players. And when a black player like Jim Brown scored a touchdown against the Redskins, Shirley would write in his column in the Washington Post that player had integrated the Redskins end zone. That was Shirley Povich. And I think that Shirley Povich would approve of this discussion on this topic tonight. So this is very meaningful to us, and it's very much part of what we do. Before I introduce our moderator, Jerry Bembry, a few quick reminders. John Eisenberg and David Steele will be signing books after the panel at the table to my left. Jason Reid's book was out of stock when we requested it from the university bookstore, which I think is a good sign, Jason. It will be available soon at the bookstore at the Stamp Student Union. The panel tonight will run 35 to 40 minutes, followed by questions from the audience. Coach Locksley has a hard stop at 7. So it's possible we'll go beyond 7, but if you see Coach Locksley head for the door at 7, that's why. Okay, now, Jerry Bembry, to my immediate left. Jerry is a senior writer for Andscape, covers the WNBA, the NBA, college basketball, golf, tennis, more. He is co-director of a documentary on the great Coppin State basketball coach, Fang Mitchell, and most importantly, the father of Ashley, an Academy Award-winning producer. And finally, Jerry and I were colleagues at the Baltimore Sun for 10 years. I'm not sure that's a career highlight, but I'm going to mention that anyway. Okay. Jerry, thank you for assuming the moderator's role. I'm going to hand the mic back to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's discussion on the rise of the black quarterback. This is going to be a brief panel, so I just want to get right to the panelists. Jason Reid, to my left, is a senior writer for ESPN's Andscape and the author of the book, Rise of the Black Quarterback, What It Means for America. Prior to coming to ESPN, Jason was an NFL writer for the Washington Post, and before that, he was a sports writer for the Los Angeles Times. John Eisenberg, to Jason's left, a longtime sports writer and sports columnist and the author of Rocket Men, The Black Quarterbacks Who Revolutionized Pro Football. John has authored a long list of books, but he's best known locally as a sports writer and columnist for the Baltimore Sun, one of my former coworkers. David Steele, also a longtime sports writer and columnist and author of the book, It Was Always a Choice, Picking Up the Baton of Athlete Activism. David is a Merrill graduate, has been a columnist and sports writer at a long list of places, including the Baltimore Sun and Sporting News. I'm going to skip Doug for a second. Mike Locksley, as you know, is the head football coach here at the University of Maryland, a job he's held since 2019. Mike began his coaching career in 1992, and in 2018 was the winner of the Broyles Award as the nation's top assistant coach, also a former football player and a basketball player at Towson University. And the legendary Doug Williams. We can have a panel with Doug by itself. And you got good applaud if you want to. Yeah. The first black quarterback to start and win a Super Bowl, a game in which he was named the MVP. Doug has been a longtime NFL executive who currently works as a senior advisor for the Washington Commanders. And let's get right into it. For the students in this crowd and the students who are watching on streaming, all you know in the NFL is the success of black quarterbacks, from Patrick Mahomes to Jalen Hurts to Russell Wilson. On opening day of this season, there were 14 starting black quarterbacks. But it wasn't long ago that black quarterbacks were deemed to be unqualified for the position. I'm going to ask the panel, what is the reason you think for the transformation, the sudden transformation of what's going on? And we'll start with Doug.
First of all, let me say this. I'm sitting here with Coach Locksley. I've known Coach Locksley a long time. When he was in the parking lot of RFK, and also when he was at the prep school at the Naval Academy. I was coaching at the Naval Academy. But let me say this. When you say the quick transformation to black quarterback, I won the Super Bowl in 1988. And just imagine the guys that came before me was not given the opportunity to play the position. There's a lot of guys that probably could have been the first if they was given that opportunity. Now, after that Super Bowl, Russell Wilson was second. And that was 25 years later, which that didn't make any sense. You break the barrier in 88, and 25 years later, there's Russell Wilson. And now I think we're at that plateau now where hopefully, the writers and the media get away from the black quarterback per se. I mean, they ain't going to never get away from it, but I'm just saying because it's happening. It's happening because owners, coaches, and general manager wants to win. And it's not about the color of the skin of the guy that's playing that position. And I say as soon as that happens, the media and the press, everybody got to get away from that and just write about the player and not the color of his skin that's playing that position. Like last year, I was fortunate, probably the happiest day of my life was Super Bowl. And why? Because I had an opportunity to take the trophy on the field where Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts was playing. And the good part about that game, they played that game where neither one of them should have lost, but somebody had to lose. But they both played it well, which tells you one thing. Let them play. It's about ability. They both had the ability to play the game, so that's where we are now.
Yeah, Doug, you're right. It was a long time, after you won and then Russell. But Jason, it seems like in recent years, it just seems like it's been quick that it's all of a sudden we're seeing that. So is there something you can pinpoint to why it's happening now?
Well, Doug mentioned the fact that these guys can help you win now, and these GMs and these coaches and player personnel executives. I mean, just like a politician's job is to keep getting reelected, if you're a head football coach, your job is to stay employed. If you're a general manager, if you pick players. So, in researching my book and talking to a lot of older executives, what a lot of them said to me was it got to be a point where the color green trumped the color black. Because the money got just so ridiculous in the NFL as it eclipsed Major League Baseball as a national pastime, as it became this phenomenon in popular culture in America, that you could no longer overlook someone who could help you to keep your job. And really, I mean, there was no altruistic things that occurred here. It was self-preservation. And, Doug mentioned the fact that he won the Super Bowl and then Russell Wilson came along after him. Well, you can point to that 1999 draft where 3 black quarterbacks were taken in the first round. It was kind of like a tacit approval, understanding that, okay, these guys really can help. And then Michael Vick came along in 2001 and was the number 1 overall pick for the first time. And just moving forward, this last year, 3 of the first 4 picks in the NFL draft were black men who play quarterback. This year, Caleb Williams is most likely going to go number 1. So, Doug said something to me a long time ago. He said that, no longer in NFL, quote unquote, war rooms will anyone say that, well, we're not going to take this player because he's black at that position, or that there's an unwritten code that you're not going to do it. The money's so big now, these guys, you have to take someone at the most important position who can help you to stay employed.
You mentioned self-preservation, and John, I'm going to ask you, and David, since you worked in Baltimore as well. When Lamar Jackson came out of college, there were guys who said he wasn't capable of playing the position. There were guys who tried to steer him in different positions. And so what do you think, what was the faith that the Baltimore franchise had to take that risk when a lot of people were saying that he shouldn't get that opportunity?
Well, I mean, it was unbelievable faith, and it was a groundbreaking moment for that franchise. They knew what you drafted in 2018. You draft a quarterback in the first round. He's going to be your quarterback. He's going to be a franchise quarterback. And they knew eventually that he was going to be the guy. And so they didn't think twice about that. I mean, for the record, they passed him over once in the first round and drafted a tight end, Hayden Hurst. then came back to Lamar at the end of the first round, which if you go through the history, I mean, a lot of the guys, a lot of the black quarterbacks before, say, the last 5 or 10 years, look, Jalen Hurts, second round draft pick, okay? Dak Prescott for the Cowboys, has been the starter from the moment he set foot on that team, fourth round draft pick, okay? Doug could give you a long tale about the draft and the way guys' stock has fallen. But Lamar, last pick in the first round, when the Ravens took him, it was a lot. Lamar is a lot like 50 years ago, Marlon Briscoe was the first black quarterback in modern pro football. There are some similarities. Marlon was not the normal size, not the normal skill set. He was not from a Power 5 conference. And he comes to the Denver Broncos, and they don't have, he gets onto the field as a rookie because the other quarterbacks are injured, and he does really well as a rookie. And how is he rewarded? The Broncos basically tell him, you're never going to play quarterback for us again. He was shut out of quarterback meetings, not allowed to have a future at that position. He had to change teams and change positions to have a pro career. 50 years later, Lamar Jackson, with some similarities, comes out towards the end of his rookie year, gets onto the field, does well. The Ravens, how do they respond 50 years later? By saying, we're going to put the key to our franchise in your hand. So that tells you how much things have changed, and that really it's a story of opportunity more than anything else. Because Marlon Briscoe was excellent as a rookie in 1968. He could have had a long career, and the history is full of stories like that. 50 years later, we're all used to it, and Lamar gets his chance, and he's great. But, it's not a surprise. He's a great quarterback. So it just shows you the difference. And the Ravens had the faith in him, and now a lot of other teams have faith to just do that. And because it's putting, as Jason said, you're putting the right guy on the field. That's all it is after a while. You're just putting the right guy on the field.
It's incredible. You mentioned Marlon Briscoe, and he was second-team All-Rookie his rookie season, and never played the position again which is unbelievable. David, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Okay.
Yeah, and just to speak of Marlon Briscoe, I grew up watching him play wide receiver for, I think it was, he played for the Dolphins for a while, played for the Bills for a while, and I didn't know until years later that he had ever played quarterback for anybody at any time, even in college. And that's the way it was. You just expected great black quarterbacks, the way they came up, they played the position their entire lives all the way through Pee Wee League, through Youth League, through high school, all the way through college. And the moment they got on the NFL team's radar, everyone kept saying, hey, what other position can this guy play? Because he's so athletic. Let's put him at wide receiver. Let's put him at cornerback. Let's put him at safety. Let's put him at running back. That's what Lamar had to hear. And I remember really vividly. I remember the first big game Lamar had at Louisville. This was his sophomore year, the year that he won the Heisman. He had this spectacular game. I think it might have been against Florida State. It was just this phenomenal game where he was just doing everything. And so much of the reaction was, wow, this guy is incredible. He's explosive. He's the future. I wonder what position he'll play in the NFL. and what I remember in terms of the Ravens, it's funny you mentioned that they passed over him. If I'm not mistaken, did they traded back into the first round to get him? Yep. If not for that, he would have fallen out of the first round. He was, he just kept falling throughout that entire draft. And again, this was 5-6 years ago. This is the 2018 draft. It was that recently that teams were perfectly willing to let somebody else take a chance on him. There was so much talk. He refused to run a 40 at the combine because he didn't want to put that into teams' heads that, we could try him at another position. We could turn him into a slash like Cordell Stewart was so many years ago. We could switch him up, put him in a bunch of different places. If that's what the thinking was that recently, Josh Rosen went 20 picks ahead of him. Baker Mayfield. That's kind of all you need to say. He was number one, and in the draft in that round, and Lamar was number 32. So, it's changed, but it has been incredibly recent. Literally in the middle of that draft is when everything changed.
Mike, you've had some great quarterbacks over the course of your coaching career. Great quarterbacks at Alabama, including Jalen Hurts. What would have crossed your mind if some GM or coach had come to you and said, "Hey, I want this guy to play wide receiver or switch positions to to really pursue his NFL career?
Yeah, you know, in this day and age, I mean, they still do it, but guys like Jalen, they're not going for it. You know, when you asked the earlier question about what do I think, I mean, from a coaching perspective, you know, I think the first thing I would say is once you see it, then you know it's obtainable. And guys like Doug and Shaq Harris who were able to go and have success, it's a lot like the 4-minute mile, breaking that barrier. And then when it finally was done, within a year, a bunch of people did it. And so Doug's success has led to others. And then what I found from a coaching standpoint, the types of offenses we run now, where you want an athletic guy that can run, because these pass rushers, you know, being a statue back there is not what you want to be in this day and age of football. And so being able to see Doug have success and then see the success that guys like Jalen and some of these other great ones, you know, we missed out on guys like Charlie Ward and Marvin Graves from Syracuse. They were at that cusp, maybe a year too late before the renaissance of the black quarterback came into play.
You really have to wonder how many great quarterbacks, black quarterbacks, we missed out on just because they were being steered in different directions. Doug, I'm curious, leading up to you being a first-round pick in 1978, did you ever sense that race was a factor over the course of your team interviews? And what was said to you that may have really ticked you off?
Well, nothing really ticked me off because, number one, just to get the opportunity to play in the National Football League was a plus for me. But let me say there's only one coach came to Grambling to see me, and that was Joe Gibbs. That's the only coach that came down, and he was working for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers back then. And let me say this, Tampa Bay Buccaneers had the number 1 draft pick in the draft. But I think they all was aware, the league was aware that we're not going to pick a black quarterback first. So what they do, they traded with Houston Oilers, and Houston Oilers had the 17th pick. Believe me, you know, being in this league as long as they was here, they understood that a black quarterback probably wasn't going to get picked. And if it wasn't for Tampa, I don't know what I would have been picked in the first round because nobody else was going to do it. So Tampa went all the way back to 17 and was able to get some draft pick and pick me because they knew that, you know, it just so happened John McKay was there. And Joe Gibbs and Ken Herock was the general manager. You know, they got together, and I, from my understanding, Joe Gibbs told Coach McKay that if we want a franchise quarterback, the kid is at Grambling. And that year, I was the only quarterback drafted in the first round. The rest of them went 3rd and 4th, Guy Benjamin and Kavanaugh. Those are the other 2 quarterbacks.
And that was an era where HBCUs were still being scouted by NFL.
That was towards the end. You know, that was in 1978. But before that, you know, the Walter Payton, the Jerry Rice, and all that. I can remember when Jackson State had 9 draft picks and Grambling had 8. You know, that's something that is unheard of today. You know, we're just trying to get 8 to get drafted for the whole year now, not from one school. But you know, I didn't hear a lot. Buck Buchanan, bless his soul, he you know, he's gone on. He was scouting for the New Orleans Saints. If you don't know, Hank Scram was the coach at that particular time. But Hank Scram was in meeting. Archie Manning was the quarterback in New Orleans. And Hank Scram wanted to draft me and trade Archie Manning. And they got rid of Hank Scram. And I went to Tampa.
I want to ask John and Jason, over the course of the extensive reporting you guys did on your books, was there anything that surprised you or any particular stories there that was just enlightening to you as you put the books together?
Yeah, you know, a lot of things. But the one that stood out the most to me was the draft where Doug went in the first round, first black quarterback in NFL history to be taken in the first round of the NFL draft. That was also the draft where Warren Moon went undrafted. And there was a legendary scout and front office a player first, then he became a scout, front office executive, a guy named John Wooten. And John told me this great story about how he was working for the Cowboys at the time in player personnel. He was a scout. And he went up to the University of Washington, and he scouted this quarterback at the University of Washington. And the guy was off the charts, leadership, arm talent, reading defenses. The guy could do everything. Guy wound up being it was the Pac-8 conference at the time, co-player of the year with Guy Benjamin, who I believe was at Stanford at that time. And he led Washington to a Rose Bowl victory, which was a pretty big deal back in those days. So the Dallas Cowboys are meeting. They're having one of their pre-draft meetings. And, I know everybody knows the Cowboys now, but the Cowboys back in the 70s you can make an argument even bigger than they are now. And they had, if you have a Mount Rushmore of football, Tom Landry, Gil Brandt, and Tex Schramm were the people who led that organization. And if you had a Mount Rushmore of football, those three people could be on it. So John was telling me this story about how he does this scouting, he does this evaluation of Warren Moon, and he goes to this pre-draft meeting. And these men, Tom Landry with the fedora and Tex Schramm, he makes this presentation. And he says to me that at the end of the presentation, you could hear dust drop in the room. And someone pierced the silence. He wouldn't tell me who, but I think I know who it was. And he says, well, did you tell him he's going to have to change positions? And John said to me that he had never done this before, but he basically, there's an expression in football where you say you get up on a table to if you really believe in a guy in the draft. And John told me he stood up and he said to them, these powerful men who were leading America's team, he said to them, no, because he's a quarterback. Well, needless to say, they didn't draft him. And, and I'll wrap this up, but I was thinking about that. He would have been the quarterback after Roger Staubach. Danny White became the quarterback after Roger Staubach. How might NFL history be different if Warren Moon had stepped in after Roger Staubach with that Asian Cowboys team that still had a lot of talent? But if you have Warren Moon throwing those balls instead of Danny White, maybe Dallas would have a few more Super Bowls right now.
And before I get to you, John, I'm going to ask Doug. I see you nodding your head. How would Dallas have been different if Warren Moon had been there?
It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that Warren Moon did not get drafted. I can't think of anybody who's played this year past Warren Moon. And I'm with Jason. I played against Danny White, and I knew the receivers that he had during that time. The way Warren Moon threw the football, if Warren Moon had been in Dallas, which I don't want to say I'm glad he wasn't in Dallas because I'm not a Dallas fan, but ain't no telling what might not have happened in Dallas. Because Warren Moon, without a doubt, with his leadership ability, no doubt would have led Dallas to a lot more opportunity to play in the Super Bowl.
And John, I just want to get what you discovered during your.
I would say this. You spent 3 years marinating in a subject, and some things sort of, my eyes began to open wider and wider as I went along. I mean, I've been a sports writer a long time. I've been in press boxes since 1979, and I guess what surprised me as I reported this story out was sort of shame on me, because so much happened right in front of my eyes that I was not aware of, because I'm not sure I could have written this book on the history of black quarterback 15 years ago, because I think it was too sad. I think there wasn't enough success, and there was a lot of guys that didn't get a chance, and it was pretty depressing. It was really sad. What happened, I think, because if you go to 2010, all right, you go step back to that moment in pro football, look what's happening. And somebody said before, it took 25 years for the second black quarterback to win a Super Bowl. In 2010, you got Tom Brady, the peak of his career, Peyton Manning. Who's winning Super Bowls? Eli Manning, Ben Roethlisberger, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, all white. And, a lot of them, the stereotype, the prototype that they wanted for all those years in the NFL, a drop-back quarterback with a big arm. To me, what changed when it all changed was starting in 2011 with the generation. Cam Newton gets drafted. Kaepernick gets drafted. Okay, the next year is Robert Griffin and Russell Wilson. Okay, and for the first time, and I interviewed Ozzie Newsome with the Ravens for this, and he sort of walked me through this, and he said, it came from college football, changed the position of quarterback. Instead of the pros saying, we're going to take you and make you be a drop back and maybe curtail your career, we're going to let you be you. We want you to bring your full range of talent, everything you've got, your arm, your legs, your brains, everything. We're going to let you run the offense. And with those guys, that generation, almost immediately, they're successful. Colin Kaepernick as a young player, to me, I'll always remember him going to that Super Bowl against the Ravens. He might be just about the best quarterback I had ever seen as a second-year quarterback. He was unstoppable. And so those guys changed the position. And that from that point forward, but not until 2011, 10 years ago, 12, 13, did you start to see the position change and the acceptance, of black quarterbacks. And it's not just about race. I mean, Andrew Luck was part of that. And, there's other things, but it's the change of style of football that finally, the NFL finally, after all these years, said, we're going to let you be you. And I think it just happened so recently. I think that if anything, it's just kind of shocking when you really think about it.
I'm glad you brought up Colin Kaepernick because he lost his career for taking a stand. And David, your book touches on activism. So I want to ask you, where does Colin stand when you compare him to the likes of guys like Bill Russell and other guys who have really sacrificed a lot of their career?
I'm glad you sort of phrased it like that, because I remember when he first did that. This is in 20. There was a lot. There were people who were saying, "Hey, this reminds me a lot of Muhammad Ali. This reminds me a lot of Tommy Smith, John Carlos, and those sort of players from that era." And there was a lot of backlash to that. People saying, "Oh, you can't put him in that class. You can't put him in that category. He's just." And they came up with all the excuses they've been given. Oh, he's just out for attention. He's trying to save his career. He's just trying to, make a big show of himself. Now we're able to look back, with some time and some distance, that he belongs in that class because his career is gone now. I mean, we'll never know what kind of a quarterback he would be, what he could have been, what kind of career he could have had. There's a whole, the whole generation of young quarterbacks who've grown up not having him as a role model, the way they had Cam Newton, the way kids have Lamar Jackson and those kind of players, because he really kind of broke the mold in a lot of ways. The way he played the position was so different from everybody else, and the NFL took that away from him. As a league and individually, as teams, as individual owners and GMs and coaches. Because of the stand that he took, and the NFL has kind of sent a message on a pretty steady, pretty regular basis every year since then that keep it, look at him, using him as kind of a cautionary tale and as a warning to the players: don't step out of line, or else this is what could happen to you. This is what we'll sacrifice him. We will remove him, delete him from this league's history, and take his career away, and make sure nobody has a chance to capitalize on his talents if you step out of line like he did. So he's going to be remembered for a very, very long time. We're going to be talking about him, 50, 60, 70 years from now, the exact same way we talk about the Alis and Smiths and Carloses and Bill Russells and those players.
Even though Colin lost his career, Doug and Mike, this is an era of player empowerment. They can speak up more now. So can you just tell me with your organizations, your team, what you're seeing in terms of players and maybe be more willing to make a stand right now?
I do think players have a lot more say-so through the union and everything else. They got a lot more power. I don't want to talk about Kaepernick's situation that much, but he took a stand for people that was getting, I guess, when you look at talking about brutality and things like that, which very few guys would do that. I don't think they have the, I don't know whether the fortitude or the strength to do what Kaepernick did. And, I would have loved to see him in the league again, but for whatever reason, and I think you all know more about it than me from an investigative standpoint, so I'm going to just leave that alone, but I do know that he deserved an opportunity to have showcased his talent.
I would say, based on how my program is run, kids have more of a voice. They have the opportunity because of social media and all the different platforms to speak and share. And I always equate it back to raising kids. My older two kids, grew up in a generation where you do it because I told you so. And then my younger two kids, my wife informed me I have to explain why. And it just blows my mind, but I find myself explaining myself quite a bit to this generation, and I think that goes along with the voice that they have. They have so much information at their fingertips to where they're educating themselves somewhat, and they now have the ability to put their thoughts and their desires out to the public, and that allows them now to have more of a voice where before you had to put 25 cents in a newspaper machine and hear what somebody else's opinion was. Now everybody has an opinion.
There have been a lot of transformative quarterbacks in this game. I'm going to go down the line and just ask you individually who you think was the guy who kind of transformed the best. Doug stands at the top of my list, but I'm going to go back and say a guy like Michael Vick with the speed that he brought to the game, and he just played at a different pace. So I'm going to start with you, Jason. Who's the guy in your mind that transformed?
But we can't say Doug again, right?
You can mention Doug quickly, and then other than Doug.
You put Michael Vick in and take me out of there. Athletically, take me out.
I mean, obviously, what Doug did was, it was myth busting, it was shattering. Oh, I'm sorry. Obviously, what Doug did, it was myth busting, it was shattering. It changed the whole game. But what Doug did aside, what I would say is Randall Cunningham. Randall. Randall. In talking to Randall for the book, there was so much I thought I knew a lot about him, but there was so much I didn't know about him. And he was really great and very open. And, like when you talk about like dual threat quarterbacks and, the whole thing about the NFL transitioning to letting players be who they are. Like Randall, he was so far ahead of his time. And, the one thing that if Randall could have had some more success in the playoffs, I think that we went from Doug all the way to Russell when you talk that gap in African-American quarterbacks winning Super Bowls. I think Randall, if he could have had more success, and that's a team thing. That's just not, quarterbacks get an outsized, amount of the credit and blame for wins and losses. But I just, Randall, because he was such an incredible athlete and had such a massive arm, and so when I think of like players on that kind of chart of who made an impact, I definitely think of him.
Well, all those names are great, and I would go with someone that we talked a little bit about before, Warren Moon, just because really the three quarterbacks who just changed the narrative. One is sitting here to my left, Doug. Randall Cunningham is the other, and Warren Moon. Those in the 1980s, because before that there was just no history. There was just none. And Warren, for instance, goes undrafted. He goes to the Canadian Football League, because that's his only choice. He plays 6 seasons. He wins 5 Grey Cup, completely dominates the league. And so finally, the NFL, maybe we'll give this guy a shot. And he comes back. He signs with the Houston Oilers as a free agent. He is the only black starting quarterback in the NFL. This is 1984, the 64th year of the NFL. All right. Doug had the only 2 quarterbacks, really, black quarterbacks, had any run as a starter. Doug was one, his 5 years in Tampa, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, not to bring up a sore subject, but they rewarded you by basically lowballing you in contract negotiations and making it impossible for you to continue. And then the other one was James Harris. And both were out of the league. Doug was in the USFL. There were no starting quarterback in the NFL, and black quarterbacks in the NFL. So Warren Moon comes in, and he starts for the next 16 years. Right, for 16 years, and then Randall joins him, and then Doug joins him and wins a Super Bowl, and the narrative changes. And Warren coming into a league where there were none. So someone has to push that door and say, look, you're just wrong. You're wrong with all the stereotypes and all the thinking. And just a steady presence year after year after year, an elite quarterback. Never again could you say that in the NFL. And so, they all deserve that recognition. But, I certainly the fact that there were none when Warren came in, I think really merits attention.
We're still allowed to say Michael Vick, though, aren't we? Okay. Because I mean, these are all phenomenal answers, and these are all people who were, meant a lot to me as I was watching this big game first, and then as a professional in this business and seeing how the evolution came. But I always remember watching Michael Vick in college, and again, sort of having the same reaction that a lot of people did years later with Lamar, saying he's doing things I've just never seen a quarterback do, and doing them at the highest level, and winning, and just putting himself so far ahead of everybody that there's no way he can be ignored or overlooked or shoved aside or sent to another position. And yet, I remember really vividly going into the draft when he came out, thinking there's no way in the world that, one, they're going to draft him number one, or two, that they're going to let him play quarterback. I think still a lot of the country was still under the impression that, well, he's too, quote unquote, athletic to play quarterback, which is still an incredible phrase that's one that the NFL stuck with for decades and decades. But to then look and see that, yeah, he did get drafted number one, that a franchise really put all of their faith in him, then to see what he did in those first few years in Atlanta when he just completely took over the league. And in a lot of ways, when you talk about things like the Madden cover and all those things, really became the face of the league. And it was just unfathomable to me that the position, that any player that position would come to that point where a black man who just was allowed to play the way he wanted to play and not, refuse to run and not settle back in the drop back, the traditional drop back style, and just, and that an offense would be designed around him rather than him having to fit into it, was just mind blowing to me. And that really kind of set the stage and laid the foundation for what teams are doing with a lot of quarterbacks today.
Yeah, I would say, and these guys have hit the NFL market, but I'd go back to a guy who, telling the NFL no, revolutionized it, because Charlie Ward is the last Heisman Trophy winner that I don't think they got drafted. And he was who he could afford to be because he had the NBA to back up. But having coached against them at Florida State in those years, he was very similar to Warren Moon and very similar to Russell and really athletic. But him telling the NFL, no, I will not play another position, I'll just go play basketball. And for what he did for college football and the championships he competed for and won in a pro-style system, I'd say that the generation of quarterback that we see playing now grew up watching Charlie Ward in college, and then saw him kind of take the stand that, no, I'm not going to play another position. I'll just go play in the NBA.
A lot of people would have said you, but who's your guy?
I Brandon Cunningham, when he came in, I had the pleasure of spending a lot of time with Randall. He came down hometown. We spent a week together. We talked. And I saw him do things that I hadn't seen anybody else. So, when somebody mentioned Brandon down there, I just thought Randall was a guy that was out the ordinary, from somewhere else, off the move somewhere. And, just watching some of the plays that he made and his spaghetti arm and getting to where it had to go. It was Randall.
You could have did that when you.
No.
I know we're going to wrap and then take Q&A in a couple of minutes. So I just want to ask just a final question for the panel. Do you think we've completely turned the corner and gotten to a place where talent evaluators will no longer see color? Mike.
I would say yes, because we keep talking about the NFL and the black quarterbacks in the NFL, but everything transcends from up high school. And for me, when you go to high schools to recruit, quarterbacks I'm seeing look like Doug Williams. And when you go and look at the top programs in the college world, a lot of them look like Doug Williams. So you're running out of the prototypical quarterback, and now they're all coming along with the skill sets because of the type of systems they're playing in.
Doug?
No, there's no doubt in my mind. When you look at what transpired last year in the draft and you look at this year's draft, You know, I don't think nobody give the kid at Washington enough credit. And then you got Caleb Williams at a SC, and you got a couple more players out there going to find a way to get up in there. I think now, and I said this not long ago, in the next 3 to 4 years, half of the quarterbacks in the league going to be of color or more. And it's not because they skin color, it's because they can play the position. You know, I'm thinking about Jalen Hurts. I remember when he was at Alabama, and everybody thought he was a running quarterback. I think when Mike, and I'm giving you credit, Mike, this is what I believe. When Mike became offensive coordinator, he became a better passer. And then he left and went to Oklahoma. And you look at Jalen Hurts now, he don't play the position to run. He played the position to pass. And if you look at some of the passes, I'm looking at 1-9 in the Super Bowl. He threw it out. And I promise you, it was right off the tip of the DB's hand, but it was a perfect throw. And it let you know that he just so happened to be athletic, playing the position of quarterback. And I think today, with the talent that he has, the talent that these young guys coming up with, that everybody wish they want on their team want to have.
I agree. I think that that a corner has been turned. I think that there's still a few steps left that need to be taken. We're going to see more of what we saw in last year's draft with the 3 of the top 4, and what we're going to see in next year's, where it may be the exact same thing. 3 of the top 4 or 5 are going to be black. Going to be a lot of black quarterbacks coming out in the first round. A lot of teams, again, putting their faith and trust and putting the franchise on those players' shoulders. But it's going to. We still have to go through a few more years of the pre-draft process, where we're going to continue to hear. We really question this guy's football IQ. You know, does he really read things well? Just all the codes, all the euphemisms, all the language that hasn't been totally flushed out of the sport, and not just from the things that that we say, just the quote unquote anonymous scouts and the GMs and the executives and people who don't speak on the record, but who really talk about it. You just go back and look at the way they talked about guys like Justin Fields and. I mean, you can even go back to like Cam Newton, things they said about him when he came out. But yeah, once that gets washed out, then I think that we'll be in a position where all the quarterbacks are viewed just as quarterbacks and as people who are going to be able to take their teams, to wherever they need to go. So we're not quite there, but we're closer than we've ever been.
There's no question that a corner has been turned these last drafts, and everything we're saying here with so much of a greater black quarterback population in the NFL, and I don't think that's ever going to change. But where I think there's still some progress to be made is look on the sidelines on Sunday. And who are the backup quarterbacks? And you know when things are really changing is when those guys that are carrying the clipboards and maybe carrying them for 10 years, all right, not getting a chance to play that much, but being a job where the NFL teams depend on you to be prepared, disciplined, basically a coach. I have not done the math on this, but certainly my own 2 eyes, I see more white backup quarterbacks than black backup quarterbacks. And I think that's when you'll know it's changed, is when you start seeing equality there. And you are starting to. The Sunday night game this week, Tyrod Taylor, all right, playing for the New York Giants, drafted by the Baltimore Ravens, I think 13 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that, is still in the league, mostly as a backup. And there are other guys. I mean, it is happening. But it needs to happen more. And so to see teams have faith in quarterbacks of color in that role, and that's, I think, when you'll know that really that this war is over.
And Jason, before you answer, I want to paraphrase something you wrote in your book. You said back in the day, quarterbacks were considered the smartest guy in the room, but not always the most gifted athletes because owners and coaches insisted on whiteness. So what about the quarterback?
Well, I go back to what Coach Locksley said. I remember when I when I got out of college and I started my career as a sports writer, I covered high school sports. And one of the things I covered was recruiting. So I would go to these quarterback camps. And when you go to these quarterback camps, when I started a long time ago, all of the quarterbacks there, these elite high school program, kids from these programs, you wouldn't see a black face anywhere there. There's a quarterback coach, a guy named Quincy Avery, who works with a lot of quarterbacks, and I've gone down to Atlanta where he works, and I've gone to other quarterbacks, and now you see like Coach Locksley said, so many of the guys there, the kids there, now look like Doug. You can't turn on college football now with all these Power 5 conferences, the Alabamas, the USCs, Clemson. I mean, all these major programs are led by black quarterbacks, and I go back and look at, Myles Garrett, the great defensive end of the Cleveland Browns. There's this video where he's doing box jumps for anybody who works out. He's doing box jumps with 100-pound weights. And when you think about that for a second, not just him, but, guys like TJ Watt, and, there are so many players who are not Lawrence Taylor, but who are dominant, fast, huge. You need people who can move in the pocket. That doesn't mean there aren't going to be great white quarterbacks still. And Josh Allen is a very athletic guy. But my thing is, we're really in the era of the black quarterback now. And like Doug said, in a few years, it's not just going to be like half the stars in the league, but they're going to be half of the elite quarterbacks in the league. So, yeah, I definitely think we've turned a corner.
We're going to turn it over to questions right now. So just for the sake of time, be really brief. And Mike might have to step out at 7 o'clock. So if you want to get a question addressed to him, do it at the top. Come to the mic. Right inside.
This is all you guys talked about, how the prototype for quarterbacks changed after what they saw them do in college. Why did college coaches and executives come around to athleticism and quarterback faster than the NFL?
Because of the high school. I said everything models up and go through. And a lot of these high schools, and it started with spread system, and not necessarily the air raid spread system, but running zone reads and the different plays that allowed you to hurt defenses, because defenses became stop the run. So the only way you could run the ball is quarterback to a degree. And a lot of high schools were developing black quarterbacks. So that's the market offered.
Thank you.
I know we talked about quarterbacks tonight, but I kind of want to talk about coaches too, because in the NFL right now they have the Rooney Rule, but it's still pretty disproportionate there. Kind of, I guess, how does this problem get solved coaching-wise? How are those strides made?
Well, I think that's a good question. That's a question that is hard to answer. It starts with the ownership. But, we talk about backup quarterback too. I think if you look in the league, a lot of backup quarterbacks end up being coaches in this league. They took their clipboard for 8 to 9 years, and they end up coaching because they think they're smart enough that they've seen it. I think once we start getting more black quarterbacks as a backup, and, they in that quarterback room, and then, at the end of the day, it's all about the ownership. Do they want somebody who can do the job, or do they want somebody who looks like me? I think that's the most important thing. I always say this: I only want somebody that when it's time to go to dinner, sitting at the table in front of his wife and his daughter, what have you, he wants somebody to look like him. He don't want to bring somebody that look like me and say that's my head coach. Now, all of them are not like that. And I'm not saying that the ones that are not like that are like that. I'm just saying if you're around this league long enough, you get that feeling. That's exactly the way it is.
Thank you.
I'll just say it real quick. I remember a conversation you and I had, I think during one of the Super Bowl anniversaries, about the coaching pipeline. How it was like defensive coaches for a long time. Then a lot of black head coaches came out of that pathway, and the NFL immediately switched to quarterback coaches and passing assistants and things like that. So you have to really keep an eye on them. They have to keep a foot on owners' neck, things like that, because they find there's a history, a documented history of teams finding ways to steer around black head coaching candidates, and it's something you just really have to stay on top of. One of the ways that.
Thanks.
Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. I have kind of a broader question. So when you think about the black football players that played QB in college, were never given the opportunity, J.C. Watts is somebody who comes to mind personally, but I'm sure there are others. In terms of a moral obligation, what does the league owe them? Because they can't be made completely whole, obviously, but what does the institution of football owe these men who never got the chance to prove what they could do on the basis of merit?
Anybody want that before I answer? Let me say this.
Yeah,
The NFL don't owe them anything. Let me say that. Be honest with you. And every black quarterback is not a quarterback. Can't play in this league now. Don't get me wrong. Everybody can. So J.C. Watts or whatever. J.C. went to Oklahoma, and I know they don't run the wishbone in the NFL. And that's what J.C. Watts was. You got to look at it realistic. You're going to have some black quarterbacks going to come in here and fail. You're going to have some white quarterbacks, Tim Couch, and a whole lot of other folks, Ron Leaf. You're going to have a lot of them going to fail. But they was given the opportunity. Right. The average black man that was in the Ron Leaf position probably wouldn't have got drafted in the first round. The guy that was in Couch position probably wouldn't have got drafted in the first round. That's the only difference. That's when you really see the difference in the choices that they make at that position. But the NFL don't owe those guys that didn't make it to the league anything.
Thank you very much.
Hi. So we talked about how different quarterbacks are looked at in the draft. And so to what extent do you think the draft process has evolved? And do you think that elements of race played into players like Justin Fields' draft stock the way that the media discussed?
Definitely. I think the draft has evolved a lot, and it's ever-changing. And, you go back 15, 20 years, the Wonderlic test was considered a major proponent of sort of, setting your draft stock. And it has since been determined that a lot of that, it's not always fair. Not a fair test always for people of color, especially, different ones, everyone's an individual, but they have definitely found that research. And so the Wonderlic test has been devalued a fair amount. It's still used, though. It is still used. So I think for so long, what the story was about a black quarterback in the draft was whatever their shortcoming was, if they had, whatever the shortcoming was, they may not have had any, but a perceived shortcoming, let me put it that way, set their draft stock. Okay, Warren Moon, coming out in 1978, all, as Jason tells, had everything going for him, but, a few scouts would say, well, he played in an offense where he rolled out. He rolled out some, he wasn't back in the pocket there, so it's not going to work. And there's 100 stories like that. People whose draft stock, I think that has changed. Okay, now I think they look at it, and you start to see it with the 99 draft, where there were 3 black quarterbacks in the first 11 picks. And that tells you we're starting to see things differently. And you fast forward to now very clearly. But there have been academic studies done about language that is used in the draft process. All right, the language that is used to describe white quarterbacks and black quarterbacks. And it's every stereotype you would think. Heady, brainy, or athletic, stuff like that. It is still going on. So that has to evolve even farther.
Thank you so much.
If I could just add something real quick, if you've heard the term while you're watching the game at either the college or pro level, sneaky athletic.
Yeah.
I try to make a point to joke about it all the time, but yeah, if you hear sneaky athletic, they talk about a white quarterback.
Student of the game.
Right. Yeah. Heady, well coached, good work ethic.
It's all still there.
The
That's all
media
Daniel
continues to be
Jones.
guilty in that regard. Yes. Thank you.
Get these media. I actually want to ask a follow-up to his question. I'm old enough to remember when those codes weren't used. I'm old enough to remember when, I read the newspaper, watched the TV, when commentators, coaches said egregious things about black quarterbacks, just straight out. How much of your reporting focused on that, and were you able to talk to any of those coaches to see if they had a change of heart, given, the advancements that have been made now?
Well, just in terms, you mean going back like 50 years or 60 years?
Well, I'm not that old, but.
I didn't talk to them.
But, 30, 40 years, and just some of the horrible things that were said about black quarterbacks on air, in newspapers.
Well, certainly the most famous one was Rush Limbaugh in 2003, said it on ESPN. They put him on the Sunday morning show. It was not a good idea. And he basically just took a huge shot at Donovan McNabb. And, Donovan handled it extremely well, but, was a class act all the way. But, the fact that he had to go through that was traumatic. And, if he was a white quarterback, he certainly wouldn't have been going through that. He basically said he'd been singled out as a ray of hope by the media because he was black. That was the comment. And that really his success, that the Eagles were good in his era because of their defense more than him. So he was singled out for that. So, I didn't talk to Rush about it.
No.
But, there's been plenty of that language, and it's very funny when you talk to people, and I'm sure Doug could address this too. I asked a lot of guys, was it just right in your face? Just the racism that you're feeling. And a lot of guys said no. It was very subtle. It was coded. And there was certainly nothing you could do about it 40 years ago. But it was not overt so much. It maybe took you a while to figure out exactly what was going on. But it was not right in your face.
Doug told a story about Joe Gibbs going to Grambling to scout him because the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the time, John McKay, sent him down there to look at Doug. And, I talked to several longtime coaches about white coaching, about what you're talking. And Joe Gibbs, I covered, when the team was the Redskins, I covered them for several years. And Joe Gibbs is one of the people who I greatly admire and who has taught me a lot about football. One of the other guys is Doug. And had a long talk with Coach Gibbs about how the way things were. And, one of the things he said to me was that when he went to scout Doug, he knew no one else was going to scout Doug. And it was just understood that the NFL at that time did not want black quarterbacks. He was very candid. And his whole thing was that, he looked at Doug. He saw Doug, the person and the player. Other people would see Doug, the black quarterback. And that's just the way it was. It started at the top with ownership. It permeated the front office, the coaching staff. And, I'll be honest about it. When I interviewed him for the book, he didn't say anything that shocked me, but it was just the way it was, and that doesn't make it right.
Right.
But if other teams would have sent a Joe Gibbs down, I think he was a running backs coach at the time. I don't even think he wasn't even offensive coordinator. Yeah, he's a running backs coach. And, so they sent this kid, this young man to go look at Doug. And, I was like, well, there was no one else. No. And he's like, no. And John McKay knew no one else was going to. So, if everybody looks at something a certain way, all those people don't think they're looking at it the wrong way.
Thank you.
So, thank you all for coming again. I wanted to actually touch on one of the last things you said because, obviously, especially at the time, for Doug Williams, like being thrown into this position as not only a quarterback, but really like a black quarterback, like a symbol for like, you know, all of black people, sort of how he was thrown into that label. And my question for Doug Williams is just how did you handle the pressure, and how did maybe your teammates and coaches or anyone else help contribute, either help you or you know, whatever.
Thank you. You know, I was fortunate to have a older brother that was a mentor to me, and Eddie Roberts. You know, that was big. And I can remember one of the reporters asked Coach Rob when I was senior coming out, what was it going to take for Doug Williams to make it in the National Football League? Coach had a one-word answer for him. He said, opportunity. And didn't say anything else. But for me, you know, getting the chance to play in the National Football League, didn't nothing else matter. You know, my thing is you put a helmet on and nothing else is outside. If it ain't in between the lines, I try not to worry about nothing else. Don't get me wrong, getting drafted in Tampa, and I always say this, Tampa's a nice town. But in 1978, you can't go no further south than Tampa. I mean, if you're going further, you're in the Gulf. So, I mean, we had to deal with that. And I can remember vaguely, you know, doing the highlights, there was a lady in the stands. And if you look at some of the highlights, you probably can see her. She had a little black doll that she was dangling in the stands, like it was on the string. You know, that's the kind of stuff you don't pay attention to. You know, so I spent 5 years there and try not to let it bother me because Coach McKay, you know, bless his soul, he was a guy that it wasn't about color for him. He played black quarterback at SC back in 1968, 69. So it was a guy who was playing a position. He was truly a coach that believed in whoever the best athlete, whoever the best player was going to play. Now, my ownership was a little different. You know, he's not here either, but I truly think after 5 years, it was hard for him to pay a black man the type of money that I was demanding at that position. And his general manager, I'm looking at him now, Phil Kruger, bless his soul too. And I can remember him when I went to see him, he told me straight up, he said, Mr. C don't want me to make friends with his money. You know, and I said, well, you know, he don't want me to play. You know, but those are things that you had to deal with. And there are things that are said in the meeting before the meeting. Let me say that. The meetings that we don't get a chance to listen to. And they're not going to come out and say, hey, you're not going to stay here because you're a black quarterback. They're not going to say that. But they all know what the situation is. And you got to deal with it. But I was able to deal with it because I didn't try not to let anything bother me. Like when I went to the Super Bowl, we had all these writers and, you know, waiting to ask questions and stuff like that. And it wasn't about the game. It was about being black. You know, and I only talked to the media when it was time for me to talk with the NFL said. You know, and one of the questions said, how is it being the black quarterback here for the Washington Redskins? Well, you know, the way I looked at it, I was the quarterback of the Washington Redskins who just happened to be black. And that's how I looked at it. I told her, and that's what I told him.
Thank you.
We got two more questions, but to piggyback on that really quickly, even though you're the quarterback of the Washington Redskins, of course it hadn't been done before. Is the weight of Black America on your shoulders? Did it cross your mind thinking that, you know, the hopes of my people are weighing on this game?
But let me say this, you know, and I know people talk about pressure. You know, I've been in athletics all my life since I was 6 years old. My whole family was athletic, and I always thought pressure was something that an individual put up on themselves, and I refused it to put up on me. But don't get me wrong, every morning when I got up, I looked in the mirror, I knew what was at stake, but I wasn't going to let that part get in front of what I had to do. You know, my thing was, you know, when the game was over, they can color me any color they want to, but there was a football game in front of us, and that's how I dealt with it.
Thank you guys for your time. Similar to the kind of struggles discussed during the entire panel around proper recognition of the athletic abilities of Black men, do you guys see the ongoing debate around recognition of employment status and collective bargaining rights for college athletes in a similar lens to the struggles of black men being accepted as quarterbacks in the league, especially given the predominant makeup of black men in college athletes?
I think that's kind of where the next big revolution is going to be. It's going to come from the college level. What athletes are going to, how they're going to comport themselves, how they're going to react to what's going on now, to their increased empowerment, to the increased attempts to go after what they believe they're entitled to, what they've been denied for a long time. And so, yeah, I think the connection is a pretty easy one to make. And, I think they understand, how we got to this position. They watched everything that went on before them at the college level and in the NFL and at every level of pro sports. And I've been asked a few times, in terms of where's the next wave of activism by athletes going to come from. I think it is going to come from college athletes. And it's going to come it's going to be couched in those terms. It's going to be on in that area. How they're going to how they're going to use the power and use the platform that they have to make change for themselves and then for everybody else.
One more question.
For your time. I just wanted to ask, in recent years, even in the early 2000s, I think you see a lot of the idea of coded language talked about every black quarterback, the idea of them being an athlete, not necessarily a pocket pass. When in reality, I guess if the media is constantly pushing that narrative onto you, from an athlete's perspective, psychologically, there has to be the idea, well, I have to prove that I'm, this type of pass, like I can pocket and throw, and that might not necessarily be what's best suited for the rise of the game in terms of athletic quarterback. For Doug, is that something that you ever thought about? And even in the 2000s for the writers, do you think that might have impacted any of the quarterbacks in terms of trying to prove that, I can be like a prototypical quarterback?
I don't think. I think number one, we got to say the guys like Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, first of all, you got to say they blessed. From that standpoint, any quarterback that play this game, and it ain't fun in the back there when you're getting plummeted by the big boys coming at you. Anybody who can move like they move and still be able to find a way to throw the football. And I'm saying that because if you watch Patrick Mahomes and even Jalen and even Lamar, it ain't about run first for them. They run when it is open and they have to and everybody else is covered. I think that's the most important thing. I mean, you get and I'm thinking about our quarterback now. We got 30 sacks in 6 games. That's 5 per game. And I'm sure if Sam had the wheels that Jalen had, Lamar had, Patrick had, we wouldn't have 30 sacks at this particular time. So as you look at it from that standpoint, they are blessed to be able to have that. That's an added weapon as far as playing the position as quarterback. Like Mike said, I think somebody talked about J.J. Watts and Garrett and them boys coming off the edge. It's a little tougher. It's a different ball game when they coming off the edge and you can't get away from them. So I think when you look at the guys today, they're blessed to have that type of talent, to move, to get away, to throw it on the run, and run if they have to.
Well, that's it for tonight. I want to thank Jason Reid, John Eisenberg, David Steele, Mike Locksley, and Doug Williams for this great panel, and thanks for the University of Maryland for hosting. Have a good